Okay, just maybe give it another 30 seconds if people are okay.
Yeah.
And just to let everybody know that this is being recorded.
Good day, Colette. That's me.
Oh, Mary, you're very welcome. And
Checking sound.
Thank you for being
I'll
here.
unmute.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Department of Arts Lunchtime Lecture Series, our inaugural lecture today. And just to let you know, you probably heard Colette saying it there that the session is being recorded, but as far as I'm aware, it'll only be recorded what's on the screen, so you won't be visible if that's a concern of yours. So you're very welcome, and the Department of Arts, along with the Department of Social Care and Early Childhood Studies and the Department of Law and Criminal Justice Studies, make up the School of Humanities here at WIT. And you're looking here at the, like I said, inaugural lecture in the Department of Arts seminar series in our School of Humanities. And I now call on the head of that School of Humanities, Dr. Susanne Denieffe, to officially open the seminar series.
Hello, everybody, and you're all very welcome. I'm delighted to see such a large turnout. We have almost 55 people in attendance, and I would say more are going to join us. I want to thank the organisers for this, organising this seminar series, and I am delighted that Colette is opening it. And I think that her talk on the seen and unseen shadows of the Holocaust in Ireland is very timely, because we only recently, a few days ago, celebrated Holocaust Remembrance Day, 27th of January. And I'm delighted to welcome Mary Drescher. I see that Colette has her talk dedicated to the memory of Joseph and Fritschel Drescher. So Mary, we're delighted that you're in attendance with us today. I'd also like to welcome all of the staff and students. I recognise a few of the names, a lot of the names I don't recognise. I'm delighted that you're here with us today. The School of Humanities is a very large school, it's the largest school in the Institute, and it's very diverse. And I think the seminar series that's organised will capture that diversity and the expertise of the staff and those that they liaise with maybe in other institutions. And I think it's great that we can bring this seminar series and deliver it within WIT. And Colette, I'm delighted that you are starting, and I won't hold you any longer because I know people are probably doing this on their lunch breaks. But I just want to say thank you to the organisers, thank you to Colette, and the very best luck with the series.
So thank you, Suzanne. So Colette will begin the series today with the seen and unseen shadows of the Holocaust in Ireland. And Colette lectures here in WIT in World Religions. And in this talk, she will give an overview of the Jewish community in Ireland and will examine Ireland's policy towards Jewish refugees prior to and during the Holocaust. And we are proud and delighted that Colette is here today to share those stories with us. And she will explore in particular the story of one Irish Catholic family whose Jewish ancestors were murdered during the Holocaust. And as Suzanne pointed out, members of one of those families are joining us today. And so I extend a very special and a very warm welcome to the Drexler family. You're very, very welcome here today. The session is for 45 minutes, including 20 to 25 minutes from Colette, followed by a chance for discussion or questions and answers. So with that, I hand you over to my colleague, Colette Colfer.
Thanks, Seamus, and thanks, Suzanne. I'm going to start the talk with the story of one family who was caught up in the Holocaust who managed to find a lifeline in Ireland. And I'll go on to give a brief overview of the Jewish community in Ireland, and we'll look at how Ireland dealt with the refugee crisis prior to and during the Holocaust. And I'll finish up by going back to the story of the family that I'm starting with. I just want to point out that on this first slide that we're looking at, that's a picture of a factory in Castlebar in County Mayo, which we're going to be talking about later in the talk. On the 8th of June 1939, Frederick Henry Boland, Assistant Secretary of the Department of External Affairs in Dublin, wrote to the High Commissioner in London, confirming that a telegram had been sent 2 days earlier that stated, "Please have British Consul at Prague informed by wire that visas for entry into Ireland may be granted to Joseph Drexler, his wife Bedřiška, and 2 sons, František and Hans. The Drexler family were from Pilsen, around 40 kilometers from Prague in Czechoslovakia. The date of the telegram that stated that the visas were granted to them coincided with František or Frank's 16th birthday. His father Joseph was 57, Bedřiška, known as Fritzi, was 43, and his older brother Hannes was 19. Here's a picture of Joseph and Fritzi. They were married in 1919. And this image was taken sometime in the 1920s or 1930s. I'm not sure of the exact date. But Fritzi, as you can see, is wearing a pale, neatly fitting summer suit. And Joseph is in a well-tailored suit and a bow tie with a walking stick in his hand, handkerchief in his chest pocket, and what looks like maybe a mug of beer in his right hand. They're both wearing elegant hats. And you can probably tell from their style that the Drexlers were a well-off family. Joseph and his brother Paul ran a successful ceramics business called Bruder Drexler. They had inherited it from their father, Albert. The company had offices all over Europe, including in Dresden, Nice, Berlin, and Geneva. Here is a postcard that was issued in 1927 to mark the company's 50th anniversary. The family had a good life. When Hannes and Frank were younger, they were always dressed the same, and they could almost pass as twins, as you can see from these photos. They went on lots of holidays. In the winter, they learned to ski on the Spitzak and Samova mountains, and in summers, they swam in lakes in Austria. The boys went on camping trips with the Scouts. They had a rich cultural life, and Frank and Hannes went to see operas from a young age. They had 2 pet rabbits, a dog named Rhino, and even a pet tortoise, which I imagine was very rare at the time. Frank loved to play the accordion. Judaism was part of their life, but it wasn't something that was hugely important. The boys went to a mixed school with boys, girls, Catholics, and Jews. They weren't circumcised. The boys weren't circumcised, but they did have a bar mitzvah. They used to even have Christmas trees in their home, and their father, Joseph, ate pork. There was a Jewish scouting organization in Pilsen, but when Frank joined the Scouts, he joined a non-denominational group. They had Jewish and non-Jewish friends. One of the Drexler factories, here it is, was in a place called Meklov in the German-speaking area of Czechoslovakia named the Sudetenland. The family also had a country house in Meklov near the factory, and the boys had an idyllic life there as children when they visited and spent time there. Their cousins used to come, they used to swim in the river and explore the nearby woods, picking wild blackberries, mushrooms, and wood strawberries, and sometimes they camped out in the garden under the stars. This was the family's main home on Tylova Street in Pilsen. They had moved there 2 years earlier from a nearby street so that in this building they could have the company laboratories, the offices, and the family accommodation all in the one building. As you can see from the building, it was comfortable accommodation. You can see here that there was a piano, a small chandelier, a Persian rug, and large windows letting in lots of light. It was a good life. One evening in the early autumn of 1938, Frank was out walking with his parents in Pilsen, and they saw a crowd queuing outside a delicatessen shop. The shop sold hot topinki, which is toasted bread with garlic, and it was open late. As they neared the shop, they realized that people weren't queuing for topinki. They were queuing instead to listen to a news broadcast on the radio announcing the agreement by Britain for Czechoslovakia to give up the Sudetenland to Hitler. Joseph, after hearing the radio broadcast, walked across the street with his wife and son to a bench in the park where he sat down and started to cry like a child. Frank had never seen his father cry before. After Hitler took over the Sudetenland, Frank was told he could no longer be a member of his scout troop. But he did stay friends with his scoutmaster Seawolf, who was not Jewish. Hannes, by 1939, had moved to Prague to study ceramics at a special school. And in the middle of that year, Joseph, Fritzi, and Frank joined him there as they made their plans to get out of Czechoslovakia. Hannes converted to Catholicism. A list of everything in their suitcases had to be submitted to the Pilsen police before they left. You can imagine them deliberating over what to include, what to leave behind. Joseph brought Frank to a tailor in Prague to get him fitted for his first ever suit. Fritzi bought her sons new shirts, socks, and pajamas. The boys would leave for Ireland as soon as possible, and Joseph and Fritzi would follow. They wanted to try to sell the family business before they left. At the time, they'd heard rumours that one of Joseph's best friends had been arrested by the Gestapo after he was denounced by employees at his Hoffman hardware shop that he owned. There were other stories of people who had left Czechoslovakia with permission, but were still taken from trains and never heard from again. You can see from this list, if you start to look down through it, that along with clothes, pillows, handkerchiefs, hats, bathing drawers, there are school books, school utensils, school case, maths rulers, and a fountain pen packed in Frank's suitcase. It seems Joseph and Fritzi wanted their boys to continue with their education once they got to Ireland. The day Frank and Hannes left Prague, they got on the train and the railway compartment was packed. As the train pulled out of the station, the boys leaned out of the window and waved goodbye to their parents. Joseph and Fritzi had hankies in their hands as they waved and waved and waved. Fritzi's hand moved with her hanky towards her eyes to wipe her tears as the train pulled out of the station. After days of travel, the boys arrived in Dublin and went to stay with their uncle, Franz Schmalke, who had accommodation on Pembroke Road. Franz was manager of the newly opened hat factory in Castlebar, which you saw in the first image. And Franz travelled regularly between Mayo and Dublin. The boys stayed with him until they managed to find digs for themselves. They phoned landladies and explained that they came from Czechoslovakia. One landlady said she was sorry, but she didn't take in coloured people. Their uncle advised them not to tell anyone they were Jewish. Irish military intelligence files from the time show that Franz Schmalke and Frank and Hannes were all being monitored at the time because they were German speaking, but they had been classified as E, meaning anti-Nazi. The boys and their parents still managed to stay in touch and send letters and postcards to each other, but in Czechoslovakia, things were becoming increasingly difficult. And although Joseph was desperately trying to sell the family company, it was proving impossible to get any kind of a fair price. One day, they met Frank's old scouting friend, Seawool, in Pilsen, and gave him a little bronze standing bear. This postcard to their sons is dated 6th of March, 1940. So you can see, I'm assuming that's Fritzi's writing, addressed to Hans on Lansdowne House, Lansdowne Road, Ballia O'Clia. It became too late for Joseph and Fritzi to leave. In September 1941, they were forced to wear the yellow star, and just 5 weeks after this, the boys received their last letter from their parents in October 1941. According to the Holocaust database of victims, Joseph and Fritzi Drexler were taken on Transport S from Pilsen to Terezin, also known as Theresienstadt, on the 22nd of January 1942. Joseph, as you can see, was number 17 on the transport records and Fritzi was number 18. They were kept in Terezin for just over 3 months. On the 30th of April, they were taken on transport AS number 605 and 606 to a place named Zamość in Poland. The official wording is that they were deported and never returned. There was a Jewish ghetto in Zamość, which was also linked to work camps. Ghettos set up by the Nazis were often used as holding grounds for Jews en route to extermination camps. Deportations from the Zamość ghetto began on the 11th of April 1942, when around 3,000 Jews were sent to the Belzec death camp. Joseph and Fritzi arrived in Zamość sometime after the 30th of April. Deportations continued until the ghetto was liquidated. That's everybody was exterminated. By October 1942. The exact date and place of Joseph and Fritzi's death is unknown. The story of the Drexlers is just one that links Ireland to the Holocaust. And yet I think that it might seem to many from the vantage point of Ireland, here we are in 2021, that the Holocaust is something that happened long ago and far away with little to no relevance or consequence for us here in Ireland. We're a small island on the edge of Europe. We were a neutral country during World War II. And today the Jews make up, the Jewish population of Ireland is just 0.05% of the total population. In 1936, Jews made up around 1% of the population in Ireland, and yet there are many shadows of the Holocaust here. Some are seen and some are unseen. There are buildings, documents, survivors, victims, descendants of victims. There are poems, documentaries, books, films, educational courses and resources, public talks, memorial events and organisations. Today we're shining a little bit of light so that more shadows can emerge. There are also psychological shadows. In analytical psychology, the shadow is the part of the self where we put our unwanted traits. These elements of ourselves, if repressed, become part of the unconscious and are then projected onto others, so that the evil inside ourselves becomes the evil of the person out there, the evil of the other. This is the process that makes scapegoats, and the Jews were made scapegoats. In terms of arts in this changing world, it's important to think beyond historical facts and to examine the psychological shadows, not just of the Holocaust, but of ourselves. We need to be aware of where we are pointing our fingers and projecting. We need to question things, to speak up, to be aware of group psychology and of the desire to belong. The dangers, or the potential dangers too, of following orders. Otherwise, can we really learn? Although I'm using the term Holocaust today, many Jews prefer to use the term Shoah, which is Hebrew for catastrophe. The Nazis themselves, of course, used euphemistic language, and they referred to it as the final solution. They had what Hannah Arendt refers to as language rules, which were essentially lies. Resettlement meant gassing to death. A mercy death was murder, and the so-called final solution was genocide. It's not known exactly when the decision to kill 9.5 million Jews of Europe was taken, but the plan was set out clearly at a conference at a place called Wannsee near Berlin on the 20th of January 1942. Joseph and Fritzi were deported from Pilsen just 2 days after this. There was a list of countries drawn up for the meeting at Wannsee, where they gave details of the Jewish populations planned to be exterminated. You can see that Ireland is on this list with the number 4,000. Adolf Eichmann, who attended the conference, said his conscience was soothed by the fact that when the plan for the murder of millions of Jews was outlined, not one of the people there attending the meeting objected. There were 15 high-profile attendees at that meeting. There are lots of stories that link Ireland to Judaism, including just one. There's lots from ancient times, but I'm just going to tell you one. And this is an image of the Leah Fall, or the Stone of Destiny, on the hill of Tara. And it was said that, according to legend, this stone let out a roar when the person best suited to be the King of Ireland stood over it. And according to one legend, this stone was the pillow that Jacob slept on when he dreamed of the ladder to heaven. The British Israel Association even excavated an area around the hill of Tara around the year 1900 in search of the Ark of the Covenant, but excavations were stopped following a public outcry. The earliest record of Jews even visiting Ireland was in 1079, when it is said that 5 Jews came here, gave gifts to Brian Boru's grandson, and then left again. There's a few other scattered reports in the following centuries, but it wasn't until the middle of the 17th century that the first synagogue was established that we know of in Dublin, although numbers in the community were still said to be very small and not more than a few dozen. This is an image just showing you the Jewish population in Ireland. So you can see that in 1881, it was around 400. There was 394 Jews recorded as living in Ireland then. Over the following 20 years, the community grew considerably, and you can see this in the graph again. At the time, around half of the world's Jewish population, so it was around 5 million Jews, were living at the time in Russia in a place called the Jewish Pale of Settlement, where Jews were largely confined. Millions left the area after a series of restrictive anti-Jewish laws called the May Laws came into force there in 1882. Most went to America, but some came to Ireland. Those who arrived here were mainly peasants from Lithuania, and they likely left behind many friends and family. The Jews of the Pale of Settlement were completely annihilated in the Holocaust. There are 4 Irish Jews known to have been killed in the Holocaust, and 3 of them had come from Lithuanian families. Their families had lived in Ireland for a time, but had returned to live in other cities where they were at the time of the outbreak of the war. Between 1881 and 1901, the Jewish population of Ireland rose to 3,006. But because Jews came to Ireland doesn't mean that they actively chose Ireland as their destination. Some didn't have enough money to make it all the way to America. Some were tricked into getting off at an Irish port. Some mistook the word Cork for New York. And there's one story of a family who got off the boat at Queenstown, that's Cove, because the boat had run out of kosher food. The hub of Jewish life in Ireland was Dublin and the area around Clanbrassil Street, which was lined both sides with kosher shops. Despite claims to the contrary, there was plenty of anti-Semitism in Ireland. There's a character in Ulysses who says the reason that there hadn't been any persecution of Jews in Ireland, but then goes on to say this is because Ireland never let Jews in. But there are plenty of incidents of anti-Semitism here. In 1886, posters were distributed in Dublin warning people not to do business with recently arrived Jews. This is just an image of another incident in Dublin. A letter was published in the Irish Catholic in July 1893 by a Roman Catholic priest who stated that Jews were being expelled from Russia for immoral behaviour. The most famous incident of anti-Semitism in Ireland is undoubtedly the Limerick pogrom between 1904 and 1906, which resulted in Jewish homes and businesses being attacked, and a boycott of Jewish businesses, which resulted in most of the Jewish people living in Limerick at that time fleeing the city. My own paternal grandmother left Ireland in the 1930s to live in London, and she happened to work with a Jewish family named Zeph. When she came back to Ireland during the Blitz, she was in a conversation one day, presumably with people who were giving out about Jews, and my nana said, sure, Jesus was Jewish, but they didn't believe her. Arendt points out that there were different anti-Semitisms in different countries. There was a radical variety in Germany and in Eastern Europe, but Scandinavia was said to be deficient in hostility towards the Jews. And in Bulgaria, local German officials started doubting themselves, and their own anti-Semitism seemed to dissipate. This compared to Romania, where it is said that even the SS were frightened by the scale and violence of the pogroms. We don't know how anti-Semitism in Ireland would have manifested itself if the Nazis did make it this far. The Nazi Party came to power in Germany in 1933. The Irish legation in Berlin reported an increase in both inquiries and applications for visas, particularly from Jews of Polish or Eastern European nationality. In July 1938, an intergovernmental committee on refugees conference was held at Evian-les-Bains in France, but not one country consented to opening their doors wider for Jewish refugees. The Irish delegation gave a number of reasons, including an economy that was in difficulty, outward migration from Ireland for reasons of employment, and overcrowded professions. In the 1930s, the Irish government wanted to establish new industries in the state. One of the areas that was particularly impoverished was the west of the country. And so it was decided in the 1930s to send a delegation to Europe in an attempt to attract new businesses to the west. One of the members of that delegation was a Polish-born Jewish businessman by the name of Marcus Whitson. And here again is an image of the hat factory in Castlebar. The delegation managed to bring 2 hat factories and a ribbon factory to Galway, Castlebar and Longford Town respectively. And all 3 factories were set up with the help of Jewish refugee industrialists. It's thought that about 70 Jewish refugees arrived in with the factories. All 3 of the factories had Jewish managers and had started up with the help of Jewish capital. Whitstone has actually been called an Irish Schindler by some, but of course he was Jewish, whereas Schindler wasn't Jewish. The factories also provided much needed local employment in the areas where they were established. Many or maybe all of the Jews who did get refuge in Ireland had left family and friends behind who perished in the Holocaust. That's a poster for Western Hats. And in the next image, you're going to see on the left is the image that I started the slideshow with. And on the right-hand side, there's a man named Franz Schmalke. Franz was the manager of the factory in Castlebar, and he had run a hat factory in Czechoslovakia in a place called Komotov. At the time, Ireland were importing around 2 million hats a year, and so the Irish government wanted an Irish hat industry of their own. Franz was related to Joseph and Fritzi Drexler. He was Fritzi's brother. This is how the Drexlers had received permission to enter Ireland. So Frank and Hannes were in Ireland by 1939, and they settled into their life in Dublin. As soon as they could, they joined the Czech forces of the British Army. At the time, it was nearing the end of the war. The brothers did eventually manage to make it back to return to Pilsen, but there was no trace of their parents. Their house on Tylova Street in Pilsen, the last place they had lived together as a family, was now inhabited by other people. And they found out that it had been occupied by a German during the war. All the furniture and paintings were gone. The rumour was that everything had been taken from the house to Germany. Frank met his old scouting friend Siwo in Pilsen in 1946. Siwo had just returned from a concentration camp where he'd been held for subversive activities. Siwo told Frank about the bronze standing bear given to him by Joseph and Fritzi. He offered the bear to Frank, but Frank couldn't accept it at the time. But years later, Siwo did send it to him. Around this time, Frank converted to Catholicism. The brothers returned to Dublin. Frank became an Irish citizen in 1948 and married an Irish woman, Mary Clancy. They have 4 children who he lavished with love and affection. He went on to become an engineer and an academic. He spent much of his life seeking compensation and some kind of acknowledgement for what had happened, but to no avail. Frank died in Dublin in 1991. In 2012, I myself was doing some research on the factories and in particular on the Western Hat factory in Castlebar. And I visited an Irish Jewish genealogist in a poky little office in Dublin city centre one spring morning, asking him if he had any information about Franz Schmalke. He said, "You're the second person to come in here asking me about Franz Schmalke in recent months." And that's how I made contact with Frank's youngest daughter, Mary. Mary was born in Dublin in 1958 and had a very happy childhood. When she was around 12, she was watching a black and white war movie with her parents one afternoon, and her father got upset and left the room. That was when Mary found out about her family background and that her father had been born Jewish. She didn't even know at the time what being Jewish meant. When I met Mary, she had an office in her home dedicated to the family's history. The room was stacked floor to ceiling with books, old diaries, photograph albums, and business documents. There was a digital photo frame that changed every few seconds, showing a different black and white image of her father's childhood. Mary spent years researching. She wrote a manuscript chronicling the family story. She researched the hat factory in Castlebar and even made a short video about it. She also took up the baton from her father in an attempt to seek compensation or acknowledgement, but neither has ever happened. A few years ago, Mary sold all her books and she packed the documents she had accumulated into big boxes with labels seen here, and she has now turned the office into what she calls a teddy bear museum for her grandnieces and grandnephews for when they visit. She is a self-confessed arctophile, which I didn't know that word was when Mary told me for the first time, but it's somebody who loves teddy bears. The bronze standing bear that her grandparents gave to Frank's friend Siwo is now standing on a table in Mary's hall and is a symbolic link for the family to the pre-war time. Mary and her siblings have visited Czechoslovakia many times now. They've walked the streets that their father and grandparents would have walked. Czechoslovakia had come under communist rule after the war, so the family business would have been nationalised. The factories were eventually abandoned, but the chimneys are still visible. Mary and her family have never, her siblings have never managed to gain access to what had been Frank's home and the family home between 1937 and 1939, pictured here in 2009. The family did, however, manage to get a memorial at the grave of their great-grandparents, Albert and Charlotte Drexler. 4 out of 5 of Albert and Charlotte Drexler's children died in the Holocaust. Their son Rudy had died prior to the Holocaust in 1925. So this memorial honours Joseph, their son Joseph, and Joseph's wife Fritzi, their son Paul and Paul's wife Meta, and their daughters Bella and Irma, who were all deported and killed between 1942 and 1944. The shadows of the Holocaust are still present in Mary's life. Writing in 2009, she said she couldn't watch a documentary of any kind on the Holocaust without looking for her grandparents, that she has a firm picture in her mind of what they would have looked like. Joseph would have been 60 and Fritzi would have been 46. Part of her hopes to see them, and another part of her hopes not to see them. She wonders if maybe a survivor referred to in the documentary might have met them and could report that they were in good spirits. She questions too what it is that drives her to seek the truth, and she repeats the phrase, which she says is a prayer, lest we forget. This talk is dedicated to the memory of Joseph and Fritzi Drexler.
Thank you, Colette. And I think that was a interesting and a very poignant story, poignant lecture. And I think a couple of things struck me. I suppose we talk about words, and I suppose as humans we give words to the things that we value, or names and words. And to see, I suppose, people reduced to numbers on trains and numbers on lists, it's very poignant. And also, like you said, that we talk about it, but we use kind of euphemisms, and we use other words that we, in a way that we're probably, in a way, still keeping things in the shadows. And the other thing that struck me, the second thing that struck me, was the image at the start of the children and innocence, and the way that you described the children saying bye to their parents on the train. And I think that's the other thing that's poignant about this, is that maybe as humans, we have a need, it's kind of a basic want and a desire to know who we are, where we came from, our history, who our parents, who our grandparents were. And I think in a lot of these situations that was denied of people. And I think that's why, again, what was really poignant, I think, was starting off with the pictures of the children and ending up with pictures of headstones. It's that juxtaposition, I suppose, and it kind of symbolizes the loss of innocence and how that kind of transpired in that period. And I think that, like you say about the coming out of the shadows, and I think today you sensitively and really enlightened us, and you've kind of added that to that process of coming out of the shadows. So thank you very, very much, Colette, for that. And I open the floor now, or the Zoom, to maybe anybody who would like to add anything, personal stories, or even a question for Colette. And I'm not sure if the hands up function is working, but if not, maybe you just might say your name and we can come to you. Sorry, I see Philip has his hand up there. Yeah, so Philip Kremen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Colette. Really, I suppose, enlightening in so many different ways. One of the things that kind of came out at me there was your mention of the concentration camp there in the Czech Republic, or what was then Czechoslovakia, Theresienstadt. And Theresienstadt was a very kind of a unique type of concentration camp, if I can put it like that, in the sense that it was used very much as a kind of a propaganda tool for the Nazi regime to present a kind of a false narrative to the world, because a lot of the prisoners in Theresienstadt were were used to perform musicals, to do art, to do theatre, and so on and so forth. And this was actually used by the Nazi regime at the time to put a kind of a nice face, to use that terrible phrase, on the horror of what was actually going on. And I just wonder, would Josef and Fritze Dreschler, would they have been gifted in, let's say, a musical sense or theatre? Do you know anything about that background and that?
I don't actually know, but Mary, their granddaughter, is here, and I don't know, Mary, would you like to tell us?
Oh gosh, yeah.
I have no knowledge of them having a musical or even theatre background, but I know exactly what you're talking about, Philip. It's a really interesting story that some people only know about Theresienstadt and not the detail of the other camps.
Yeah, like I think, I was struck by, if I may, Mary, do you mind if I make another just comment? Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah.
Hello.
I was struck, initially I came across Theresienstadt by encountering a wonderful lady, Alice Hertz Sommer. Alice was she was an extraordinary woman. I think she may have been one of the oldest Holocaust survivors for some time. She lived in London, in a little flat in London. And Alice's posture to the world was beyond human, I would say. But she performed at Theresienstadt. She was an expert pianist, and she knew all of Chopin's etudes by heart, and she would have played in Theresienstadt literally as that was the front that the Nazi regime would have shown to the world. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks, Philip.
Thank you, Philip, and thanks, Mary. I think was there somebody else trying to come in there? I thought I heard a hello. Maybe not. So would anybody else like to say anything? If you can't see the hands up function, you can maybe. Oh, yeah, okay, I see. Sarah Logan has her hand raised. Okay, Sarah, you're muted there, Sarah. I think, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, hi there. Thank you for a great presentation, a really interesting presentation. And it has particular meaning for me because I'm from Castlebar, and I would have lived just 500 yards beyond the hat factory. So my whole youth, I passed by that factory every day, and it was just wonderful to see this and to know. Now, growing up, I would not have known anything about any Jewish involvement in the hat factory, but all my friends, their families would have been sustained by the jobs that the hat factory provided in Castlebar. So I'm really blessed just to hear this again. But I'm just wondering about the shadows that still exist in Ireland today as a result of our treatment of the Jewish population that were in Ireland. And I'm wondering, is it time to rectify it? Is there a need for what shall I say, an acknowledgement, a public acknowledgement of how we treated the Jews, how we were unsupportive of people who needed a home? And I was listening to Michael Martin on the Holocaust Memorial on Sunday. And is it just time? Is it time for us to say, yeah, we're sorry now. We didn't do what we could have done. Do we as a nation need something like that in the light of the fact that anti-Semitism is rising right throughout the world? And that, there's other things rising as well, but at least it would be some place to start.
Do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And that's incredible that you're living close to, or you grew up beside the factory in Castlebar. As far as I know, there have been public apologies made about the way Jews were treated in Ireland, and it was estimated that less than 100 Jews were given permanent residency in Ireland between the years 1933 and 1939. But certainly, I think there's always scope for more conversations about that.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Colette. And I see Una, our colleague Una, has her hand up there.
Thanks, Seamus, and thanks, Colette, for a really wonderful presentation. And it's a real privilege to be here in this company. I suppose I'm responding to Sarah's observation around public acknowledgements of the Holocaust in Ireland. And in Waterford, as many people will know, Jim Nolan has written many plays about Waterford and about Irish society. And in a recent play, Johnny, I Hardly Knew You, he speaks about that era, and he talks about, and that play deals with the rejection and the anti-Semitism and the rise of fascism in Ireland at that time. And it's a really important play because it does those things. And we're really lucky, I suppose, to have Jim as a writer working out of Waterford and chronicling the narratives, not of simply of our contemporary time, but of our history. And of course, I mean, everybody knows that the rise of the extreme right wing and is alive and well in the global world today. So I just
Yeah, I don't know if we have Colette yet.
Oh, sorry, I froze there, or it all froze. So I got the bit about Jim Nolan and how lucky we are to have his play, and I agree. I think the point, and sorry, I missed the end of it, Una, but I think the point I suppose I wanted to make, and I do want to make, is that the shadows, like we see the shadows by shining the light, but that we also have all the shadows that are inside of ourselves. And I think that is a key thing. I mean, some perspectives would say that it was the collective unconscious that manifested itself in Hitler and the rise of the right. Now, I don't know what anybody thinks of that idea, but thanks for the comments, and I'd love to. I actually haven't seen that play, and so I'd love to.
Okay, thank you. We just have maybe 2 minutes left, and I hadn't arranged this, but Mary Drexler, I know we were talking about your family. I wonder, before we finish, would you like to say a few words? Is there anything you'd like to add? I know we're talking about shadows, so maybe, if you wanted to talk and say your piece, you're more than welcome. And again, welcome to I was going to say welcome to WIT, but you're welcome to this seminar, and we're delighted that you've joined us. And we're like I say, it's a poignant story, but we are honoured that through Colette, that story was shared with us today. And if there's anything you'd like to add, please do.
Thank you, Seamus. I really said at the beginning that this is not about me. I'm delighted that Colette took up the story. I'm very honoured myself to have been, asked to join the group. I have some very close friends that have joined in today. I'm delighted that they did. And I'm not sure about shadows. I'm a very positive person, and our family have been absolutely blessed for so many reasons. I think it's all about the next generation now. It's all about the people coming up behind us and the children. And that's where my great interest is, in that we must maintain the stories even of our generation in current times, where things are just as serious for different reasons as they were back in the 30s and 40s, that it's important we keep passing on these stories. So thanks again, Seamus and Colette. I'm delighted to meet everybody. I can't see everybody, but best of luck with the continued series of talks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Colette. Before I finish, Colette, would you like to say anything to conclude, or would I just finish up?
Well, I'd just like to say thanks to Mary. I mean, it was just a chance that I met Mary in 2012, And it was a privilege to hear her story those years ago and to be able to present it now today. And thanks very much. And Mary gave me the photographs as well and the access to the photographs. So, and thanks Seamus for organising the series and inviting the staff to present.
Great. So thank you all very much. Thank you all for attending. Thanks Colette again sincerely for I would say they were beautiful, but you know what I mean, for beautiful presentation, beautiful talk, beautiful story. And I'd like to thank the Drexler family as well for being present and for allowing that story to be shared with us. And thank you all very much and good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's some people still here, so I just want to say thanks to my students who helped out looking after the waiting room.
Has recording stopped or are we okay?
Oh yeah, we should.
I'm not sure how to stop it.